think Kitty, you might be on mute still.
I am on mute. Welcome, everyone, and good morning to those of you who are in the morning time zones. We are going to go ahead and move away from this slide, but thank you for participating. This will help us as we continue to create and guide research related to our session topic today, which is poll every, well, hold on a second, I'm having technical difficulties. Doesn't want me to move past it. Okay. So we are going to be talking today about self-determination theories and framework for structuring OER-enabled pedagogy. Just to give you an idea of who we are, I will introduce myself and allow my colleague, Eric Worth, to introduce himself. My name is Catherine Williams. I am the professional development educator at the University of Pikeville.
And my name is Eric Worth. I'm the professional development manager at the University of Pikeville.
So today we're looking at providing both a framework as to what we mean when we talk about self-determination theory, also what we mean when we talk about OER-enabled pedagogy and open pedagogy, and how these have an interesting intersection that we've discovered over the course of our research. We have done a fair amount of data collection up to this point, and this is an ongoing research project. So we're at the kind of secondary phase of research at this point. So we do have some data for you to kind of take into mind as you think about how you might implement OER-enabled pedagogy on your own campus or in your own courses. And then we want to reflect on how the structure of OER-enabled pedagogy could actually motivate students in developing materials for courses or future courses. And then also, what are some regulatory behaviors to keep in mind as you're creating the framework for these OER-enabled pedagogy assignments and courses. So just to get us started, let's do a little bit of definition. There's a broad swath of how people kind of look at open pedagogy and OER-enabled pedagogy. We've really kind of focused in on OER-enabled pedagogy as the framework for how we approach our own research. So while it is within the broader taxonomical tree of open pedagogy, OER-enabled pedagogy is defined by 4 criteria that Wiley and Hilton have developed. So that's the students create a new artifact. The artifact supports learning beyond the creator, so it's a non-disposable assignment. The students may share their work publicly, and the students may openly license their artifacts. So this is from the Wiley and Hilton paper defining OER-enabled pedagogy. And in the development of this, we also have been very cognizant of ethical issues that may arise from having to allow students to make their work public. So if you have questions about that, we're certainly happy to answer. Self-determination theory is a little more maybe esoteric in the field of open pedagogy. You know, it's not necessarily the most well-known approaches. It is a framework for motivation, and this was developed out of the work by Ryan and Deci. And it really looks at like how intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is developed and what are those kind of regulatory behaviors that help support cognitive and social development. So it's looking at pro-social behavior a lot. And there's a really great website at selfdeterminationtheory.org if you really want to learn a little bit more. I don't really want to spend too much time here because we do have a finite amount of time. I want to give you a little bit of background as to who or what our institution is. We're a 4-year liberal arts institution. We're a school of opportunity. So when we say school of opportunity, what we mean is we are an open enrollment university. All of our students are required to enroll in this first-year seminar course where we have conducted our research in OER-enabled pedagogy. And that project was the co-creation of what we call a college survival guide. And the first iteration of this ran last year, and we're now on our second iteration with our next class of incoming freshmen. It's broken into 3 phases. There's the proposal phase, the draft phase, and the final submission. In line with how Haggerty values the role of peer review within open pedagogy, we have incorporated that in. And then as far as some of those issues that we are aware of, as far as student ownership of material, right, because they are copyright holders, we have students go over a licensing and attribution form where they are introduced into what it means to have a licensing project, or like what does it mean to license your work. And we do not influence student decision, right? We give them information, tell them how, what these various things mean. but we're not here to tell them that they have to publicly license it publicly, right? So the students ultimately can determine whether it falls into the 5 R's of OER. And then we host all of our projects on Pressbooks. And if you have questions about seeing that final thing, I'm sure we could put the link in the chat.
So just kind of an overview of the project itself. We, after the first semester that this ran, we interviewed 16 students about the project because we understood that motivation is just not something you have or you don't have. There's different kinds of motivation and they can lead to different outcomes on the student's part. That's part of what SDT, self-determination theory, goes over. But we interviewed students. We asked them about how the project and the elements of the project and the openness of it impacted their experience and their motivation. We then transcribed those interviews and coded those for themes, and then reviewed the themes in relation to the theory of self-determination theory. Katie, if you can advance the slide. So just an overview of self-determination theory. It holds that there's 3 basic human needs that drive motivation: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy and competence, we probably all kind of understand what those mean. Relatedness refers to this ability to connect with others. So within a classroom, of course, that would be students connecting to the instructor in a kind of that teacher-mentor role, as well as connecting to other students within that class. So we wanted to make sure that these are the elements that are well represented within a course and within open pedagogy. Next slide, please. So there's a little bit more to this slide. What self-determination theory says that basically we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation down there at the very bottom would be behaviors that students do inherently for the enjoyment of it. They want to do it, they like to do it, and they do it for the enjoyment of it. Extrinsic motivation varies. There's 4 different kinds of how those can actually be regulated by what is driving that behavior. So the very first one there, external regulation, is this idea that I'm motivated by something that I'm going to get a tangible reward for from somebody else, or I'm going to avoid punishment for somebody else. So within the classroom setting, this may be because I'm going to get a grade, or if I don't get it, I'll fail the course or something like that. Introjected regulation is more internalizing what that behavior is, but I'm still really trying to either get something or avoid something. So here the driving behavior may be to increase my view of my own self-worth, to feel more pride in what I'm doing, or to avoid shame. And we'll talk about how this is manifest in open pedagogy, because that non-disposable assignment plays a big role in driving this kind of motivation. Identified regulation, the person's even integrating that more into their concept of self. They're looking at the behavior and saying, I value what I'm doing because I'm getting some skill or some kind of benefit to it that's going to help me achieve a future goal. Of course, this is huge in the field of education because students aren't always doing things in class that they consider fun or enjoyable, but if they are seeing the benefit that they have of the skills that they're building, it can drive their motivation. And then integrated regulation is this idea that I'm starting to see the behaviors and the value to it as being even more internalized to myself. So it's getting closer to that intrinsic regulation or intrinsic motivation, but it's starting to see how projects or behaviors that I have align to personal values or to my own value and sense of myself. So it says basically a self-determination theory that we can have these present at different behaviors and different levels at different times in different individuals. And so this is kind of how we were looking at the results from this study. Okay, if you can progress it. So just kind of going over one more piece about self-determination theory to frame what we did. You have these ideas, these types of extrinsic motivation, these types of intrinsic motivation. Self-determination theory says those first 2, the lower levels of the extrinsic motivation, are controlled. And so they're really something's driving the student rather than driving themselves. The last 3 are them, they're starting to drive themselves motivation-wise, and they're going to get better results as a result of it. They're going to gather the information, they're going to learn the information better, they're going to transfer that to other environments better, they're going to maintain it over time better, and overall, if they can move towards intrinsic regulation, they're going to have a better sense of self and better psychological value as well.
Swear, muting. So we found some interesting breakdowns as we went into kind of doing the qualitative coding of the interviews that we did. And so much like Eric just broke down what it means to have external, interjected, identified, and interregulated, I'm going to go ahead and break that down a little further into the developmental themes that we discovered. So unsurprisingly, external relation, the tangible reward, or the avoid threat of punishment, right? So that kind of things where the students recognized that there was a reason to do this and it was going to, help them get something out of it, that was not something that we're particularly surprised about, because we see that in all of our assignments, right? So a tangible reward may be anything from a grade to avoiding, in the case of avoiding a threat of punishment, it could be something related to the idea of not failing a class, right? So you're trying to remove yourself from these perceived negative behaviors. The introductory regulation, so we have this avoidance approach categories, right? So we're looking at how students are creating content and how this particular approach of creating content is going to ultimately help them in their perception of their career or academic goals. The identified regulation is where we saw the most. And so all of our students that recognize that by doing this project, I'm going to get some sort of tangible skill out of it, whether that is something related to academic progression. A lot of our students saw things as it relates to their career. So I'm doing this project because by learning how to study well, I can do well in my biology courses, which means, well, I can do well in my medical program that I hope to achieve one day. This was all very oriented to further progression in the future. So not surprising in relation to the idea of self-determination theory, right? So the identified regulation, we knew that this was a possibility, but what we found whenever we were actually doing the research is that our students, though they did not necessarily understand self-determination theory, were very, very pragmatic in their understanding of why they were doing assignments. But a lot of that came down to the clarity that we offered in our assignment instructions. We know that students are demotivated by feeling like they're doing busy work. And so everything needed to have purpose and everything needed to go further than just being like, you're doing this assignment because I said so. And then the integrated regulation, a lot of our students are very deeply motivated by helping others. And this isn't hugely surprising, right? But it is interesting to see how often students may have done something like, I chose this topic because I did this, I had to do this whenever I entered college, right? It's one that comes to mind is we had a student who wrote a band project. And so her entire development of her band project was related to the development so that other students would feel like they could come to her. So it was just interesting to kind of look at how our students are breaking this information down. Even though they aren't breaking it down in the SDT framework, that's something that we did later. Eric, is there anything you wanted to add to this slide? I know this was one of our more complex ones.
Yeah, just to answer a question I did already in the chat as well. Somebody asked why external regulation is bad. None of these are necessarily bad. They're just different. And so the thing about external regulation and interjected regulation within the literature of self-determination theory is that when those things are removed, the behavior is less likely to continue. So if all the students are doing an assignment towards the grade and they do not see the value to themselves or the value to others, those kind of higher levels down there of identified or integrated regulation, then when that grade is over, the threat of punishment is gone, they're out of the class, they are less likely to continue doing those behaviors or learn that material. So they're not learning the material, they're just really kind of trying to get through it. So not necessarily bad, we're going to get to this, but it's sort of unavoidable in the classroom often. It's just not, what we look at is where is the majority of the motivation coming from? And somebody could have all of these present in different times within the class or for different reasons. But if the majority of the reason they're doing it is just to get through the grade, then they're less likely to achieve the educational outcomes we intend them to in the class.
Yeah, maybe I think this maybe provides a little more clarity as to, how this information isn't necessarily bad or good in one way or the other. Really what it is it's a guide for you to figure out how to implement OER-enabled pedagogy specifically, but really anytime you do any kind of educational development in any course, I think that keeping this in mind is a good idea. But that's me talking as an instructional designer. So let's break it down into the three areas that that SDT really kind of focuses on, this idea of agency, right? So the students are in control of their learning, relatedness. So they see this as directly related to the work of their fellow peers or their instructor, and then competency. So the students feel like they're gaining skills or that they are showing competency in a topic, or in this case, an assignment. Our agency, we're giving students as much choice as possible. This was built into the framework of the project, and we discovered that the more agency a student had, the more likely they were to move beyond that external regulation of, so like the tangible reward or the avoid authoritative punishment. So if we allow self-direction, we'll see higher indications of agency, which allows them to change things so that will align to their goals, right? So the student will create or choose a topic selection that is relevant to what they want to do in their career, or that is relevant to what they want to do with their professional life, or really wherever they're going with it, or it's relevant to their athletics, because we have a huge athletics population. And it also increases the likelihood that the students are going to select something that they're interested in versus feeling like they're being kind of cornered into something. We know that relatedness is very important for students to buy deeply into this idea of intrinsic or internal motivation. So we want as much connectivity between not only that kind of instructor-student dyad, but also student-to-student, which is why we built the peer review in, which is why we are encouraging group work. So the project had opportunity for group work for students who felt like that was like where their strengths lay. We also encourage the instructors to allow students to share within class, which is really important to kind of developing this idea of relatedness. Again, relatedness isn't necessarily a new concept whenever it comes to designing courses. We know that we need to build intentional community within our classrooms, but this just further fostered that necessity. And then finally, competency, right? So we're wanting to build student skill acquisition. And the way we do that is through repeated stages of feedback where you're giving detailed, direct feedback to the student, and that the feedback is positive. So we want the feedback positive in the sense it's instructive, and we're not just making it so the student really doesn't have any way to build that competency. So that's really vital whenever we're looking at implications for practice.
So kind of coming back to how we can look at the different levels of motivation, particularly extrinsic motivation in practice. So in here, we didn't even put on the idea of intrinsic motivation, just because really in the project we did and the people we worked with, we didn't see a lot of evidence of intrinsic motivation. I mean, the students were doing the assignment. They weren't going to keep on doing the assignment if we decided that it was not required anymore. So looking at these external regulation, it's likely present, it's graded, it's required. Integrated regulation and identified regulation. With those, identified regulations really should be present in any assignment, whether it's open or not. We really need to, as instructors, point out and help students learn how it is that the material that they're learning helps them achieve their future goals, and how it's beneficial. Or else, if they don't understand that, why would they be in the class? Interjected regulation was really a place where we saw the idea of the non-disposable assignment or the open come in. People really felt that was a big part of motivation. Not always a bad thing. Some of them really wanted to share their work with their names on it, so they would have their name out there. They wanted to show people what they did, and they wanted the credit that would come with it. Also, some students were a little fearful that if they put something out there that wasn't a good quality, that others would see it. And they said that essentially if they wouldn't be concerned of their teachers seeing it, but they didn't want peers or other people to see it. So really kind of interjected and integrated were the places where we saw open come in the most. Integrated, some people really did feel like they were connected to kind of their deeper purpose. I want to help people. This is something we should do. I like helping other people, which that wasn't as possible with some of the disposable assignments. They saw it being really present within the non-disposable assignment. Katie, if you can go to the last one, please. So just kind of a final note before we end up here. We know that not all motivation is created equal, and nothing's necessarily good or bad. But coming down to the next one, I think we've all heard of those ideas of an open pedagogy project where maybe the students are creating test question banks, and those questions might be useful for future classes, but they also may be useful for the student. If they show up on a quiz, you can say, well, these questions will be on a future quiz. If the students are doing the assignment in its open pedagogy because they think it's going to just benefit their own grade, they might not be making those deeper connections that we want them to make. So it really comes down to how do we teach and how do we mentor students through it. Also, there's no good or bad about necessarily the balance between them. It's as we're mentoring students, we need to help them to see some of the greater benefits that they can have in their projects. And then the last one, we're not going to go over too much just because I want to get some time to answer people's questions, but there is a place to mentor students with this idea of, are they in that zone of proximal development? We want them to that place where they are just barely pushing themselves a little bit further than they always have been. We don't want to take away their agency by jumping in and saving them every time they have a problem, but we have to be aware that if they get to the point where they're overloaded cognitively, we may have to mentor them through that barrier so they can continue to progress. And we saw that with some of our faculty. Some of them kind of went into students are struggling, I'm going to give them all the answers, while other people found a way of maintaining the student's agency, not telling them what to do, but helping them through to the next stage. So with that, I think we will take some questions. We'll look through the chat, but also answer if you unmute.
Well, we did have a question just come in, Eric, and I think I'm going to direct it at you. Were the identified motivations connected to the process of open pedagogy or the content of assignment, survival guide, parentheses? So were we connecting the motivation directly to the concept of open pedagogy, or were we connecting it more to content of the assignment?
We asked just a lot about motivation in general. When we had it coded, it was actually a little bit of both, but what generally students were saying that we coded to that higher level of extrinsic motivation was that they enjoyed helping other people. They thought we should help other people, that we should push ourselves and continually improve ourselves. So yes, it was present within the assignment that we gave them because we tried to make that a part of the assignment. But at the same point, you can see how in any open pedagogy project, if a student really, if we work with them on what they value and they value helping other people, the non-disposable nature of open pedagogy, the whole intent really is for it to have some benefit to others other than that student.
Oh, Virginia, yeah.
Hi, yes, excellent presentation and just a very fascinating project. I really was very excited to see it both as a teacher and as a researcher. So as a teacher, I'm wondering if along with the forms for disclosure or the release forms, if you could also, if you have anything about how you scaffolded this, because seeing what the students saw as far as pacing it out would be really informative. And then as a researcher, I'm actually currently working on a faculty survey of motivation to adopt OER based on self-determination framework. So I just want to say it's great to see this theoretical approach used. And you know, Veronica, all motivations are valid. So whatever motivation we can get to get the student to engage and learn. So I just wanted to share that, and I very much will be contacting you with whatever materials you're able to share.
I think we can share quite a lot.
And we should touch bases because we're actually doing interviews right now. Our faculty members who went through a change, and we're doing change to OER, and we're doing self-determination theory as a structure for that as well.
Oh my goodness, we need to talk.
Absolutely.
We also did use a scaffold approach with in the second run of the project, essentially from what we learned with our faculty, we discovered that we needed, and this actually relates to a question we had in the chat about how we keep the instructor from allowing the instructor maintain autonomy within the classroom. So in the first iteration, we saw that the instructors were more likely to kind of remove things that would be an autonomous decision-making place for students because their own lack of understanding or really ability to correctly or successfully would probably be the best word here, to successfully facilitate OER-enabled pedagogy. And so in the second iteration of it, what we did is we developed a much more not structured, but a much more comprehensive framework for faculty as far as like guiding them to how you get students through the various phases of the project. And I think that's a document that we'd be willing to share, though I don't have it on hand, so please contact us.
I'm gonna interject here just for a second, and the session is out of time. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, but everybody